This is an abridged campaign of the Stellaris Nemesis DLC. Abridged meaning we'll only be looking at the most important moments, which in Stellaris won't be that many, so this may be quite short. Here is my new species. We are a species with one thing in mind. We're going to do what the DLC calls become the Crisis. We're going to ruin everything in this galaxy we're creating here, which is what the new DLC supposedly allows you to do. For the settings for this game, I slapped it on default and then enabled Iron Man mode because I don't have achievements in this game. It's time to finally get them by playing vanilla. For the other settings, I put the difficulty up by 1, the galaxy size up by 1, and also doubled the hyperlane density, combined with making it a spiral arm galaxy. The idea behind all that was to make a galaxy that was more suitable to being conquered and generally having constant warfare, with fewer choke points, although the spiral arms, will have choke points between them. So essentially we're going to have a mix of areas that are really dense, like the one we're seeing right here, and then gaps between the spiral arms with long, single choke points like you can see coming out of our home planet to the southwest. So, as the game begins, here we are, we're playing Stellaris. So what is this DLC? Well, at first it's not very clear because nothing appears to have changed. What I initially thought this DLC was going to be when I heard about it was something that lets you play as, say, the Unbidden or the Scourge or something. One of these factions that in normal Stellaris shows up towards the end. I figured you'd start as them on like a different map or something, and then the end game would be to come to the galaxy and destroy everything after doing something else. Unfortunately, my imagination about what the DLC is has once again caused me to become disappointed. In fact, it's very similar to normal Stellaris as far as I can tell. So here we are, we're just going to start the game. The whole being a crisis faction thing won't come in until later. So, let's hang out and grab the territories around our starting area as normal. And by the way, if you do want to see a commentary on a relatively normal Stellaris campaign, I think I might have one somewhere on my channel. You know what, come to think of it, I think all I have are challenge runs. Well, there's more Stellaris content out there if you want to see it on this very channel. So we're going to be skipping through quite a lot of this early game because we're just making stuff, making planets, making ships and claiming systems. There is one thing to mention, which is that with this DLC and the patch that came with it, they have changed how the economy works. Some of the buildings are different and the way you get building slots are a bit different as well. Broadly speaking, it's different. I'm not sure whether it's better or worse because I don't really have much experience with either system, but it just meant I had to get used to doing something a bit differently. You can see my economy isn't the most stable thing. We are going to be playing things very close to the edge economically. We're going for maximum boom strats to steal as much territory as possible, and this will involve abusing the market system to constantly rebalance the different resource stockpiles we have. Most of all, transferring a lot of our resources from the other stockpiles into alloys, because alloys let us claim more systems and they let us build warships, and that's what we're going to need to be a crisis after all. And I was planning on doing some early aggression, so we're going to get a navy up and running, well, as soon as we have somebody to use it against, I should say. The process of acquiring such a victim has been changed in the new version of the game. I used to complain about the first contact being kind of weird. You just randomly make contact with someone and then nobody cares on either side of the agreement. It's a slightly bigger deal now. You have to go through this diplomatic process, which can have these little events that determine to some extent how you'll view each other once first contact is done. So as a sort of hostile faction, I'm going to be quite mean throughout these events. I won't really talk about all of them. There are quite a few, but they don't matter in the grand scheme of things. Just something to do along the way, especially in the early game when not much else is happening. Looks like we've got some hostile aliens somewhere to our south according to the direction of the signal or where we saw the enemy ship that triggers the first contact, just like in the old Stellaris. Well, we can't complain about them being hostile because we probably look the same to them. It's actually somebody else who makes the first contact, since the AI can make first contact with you if you don't do it to them. Here we have a chance to say hello to another very hostile looking faction. They're militaristic, they're xenophobic, they're basically just like us, and that means we have to kill them. We are now though going to encounter another change in the new version of Stellaris, the intel system. So at first, we don't even know how big their territory is. We can tell they're next to us, but that's about it, because there's this new intel screen where you don't really know much about other factions until you've interacted with them quite a lot, or until you've spied on them. So we have this intel bar here. I think it goes up if you do things like trading and just generally being next to each other, but you can use an envoy in order to speed up the process by actively spying on them. So the goal will be to find out things like what their fleet strength is, or what their economic strength is, to work out whether your faction can compete with theirs, and if you're bigger than them, you might as well declare war. In the past you would just know that right away. Now there's a bit of a process, and that makes a bit more sense, I think, since you're not really supposed to know everything about these aliens you're just meeting. But you can tell what my plan is. I'm spamming out corvettes. It's time to build up a navy and prepare for trouble. You can see we've got this great choke point here. There's another faction to our west, the guys I was talking to earlier. So we've got a choke point where 3 factions will have to fight over one region or one system to get at each other, and I'm going to be controlling that system soon enough, so we can set up a starbase there and just control this little crossroads between the factions. Pretty handy. Once I've got my fleet here, I had to decide whether to attack them and when to attack them. I'm not actually going to get the intel we need, I'm just going to guess that maybe we would win, a classic strategy, but I was waiting to see if our little Beetles could come up with some better ship technology before I did it. In the end, the decision was made for me, because the guys on the left, the light blue faction, just decided to declare war. They want to capture this nice choke point system of me. Well, there you go, we're already there, we're ready for this conflict, for sure. Let's do it. We don't have any claims on their territory, so we can't get anything out of the war ourselves, but we can not lose, which is always good. And things do get started right away, because their fleet immediately attacks the position they are claiming, but my fleet is here to fight them. We've just finished refitting our ships, in fact, right in time for the battle. The enemy have a little bit more number than us, and in Stellaris that's bad news. But we do have some number in the nearby shipyard. The shipyard doesn't really seem to do damage proportionate to what its number is. I don't really know how it works. What the number really means is always a mystery. But what we can do is make new ships into the combat and just reinforce our side. And because this combat's going to last quite a long time due to both sides having terrible weaponry, we certainly have time to put more ships into our fleet as it fights. And we do win the battle, but both sides lost roughly the same amount of corvettes there. It looks like we destroyed them all, but most of their corvettes will have jumped away and they'll come back later. So both sides have gained a whole bunch of war exhaustion there. A successful defense, but it doesn't really get us that far ahead in the war. We're certainly going to have to fight them again, but I did want to press some kind of advantage here. So I decided to move west and attack their border system. They also have a starbase, but because it's not defended by a fleet, we should be able to whittle them down. Again, the fact that their number's kind of high won't mean much because starbases don't really apply their power. I guess some of the number is just talking about the fact that they have high health compared to most stuff. So it will take us a very long time to capture that base, but if we do, we'll still have the enemy choke pointed off, so that will be a nice strategic position, and we do eventually get it. We can also repair the base and use it just like our own base, effectively meaning we're in the same position as before, but we have one of their systems occupied. We could even claim it during the war if we have enough influence, and get it as a prize for our defense. There's just one problem with this plan. While I was doing that, the enemy have been rebuilding their fleet, and it shows up right now. Plus, that fleet turns out to be quite powerful. They've probably grabbed a few techs as well. They're most likely ahead of us because they don't have that many ships, but their number is pretty decent in comparison to us. What we're going to do is run for it. We're probably going to get destroyed if we engage them. Our main hope is to sit at our own station where the station might help, and of course we can keep reinforcing. We're going to be saved here by the fact that the AI now has to spend a long time itself taking back its system. In fact, I think they kind of messed up here because they were sitting in their system without taking it back for a long time. I don't think they actually engaged the station I took. for whatever reason. But while I was waiting for something to happen and rebuilding, well, something did happen, something bad. The other faction I was planning to attack originally, they declare war on me. They're just trying to humiliate me because they don't like me. Well, fine. We can try and get a few prizes from this war because I had already put claims on a couple of their systems since I wanted to invade them. But we're not going to be doing any invading anytime soon because now we're at war in both directions at that T-junction choke point. We really just have to sit there and hope the enemy don't kill us, especially at the same time. For the traditions, I've been spamming my way through expansion to help us with expanding, and now we'll go into supremacy to get us some supremacy. There you go, that's about the extent of my tactics. I don't know what the meta with traditions is, and it may have even changed in the recent updates. But expansion and supremacy sounds like the name of the game for our Doombeetles. I'm expanding into the final spiral arm of the galaxy on the edge. Because we're near the end of the arm, we know that to our north there'll be nothing essentially, so we can start expanding around the edge quite freely there until we encounter someone. And it's really the same deal with our main arm where we started. It's a very dense area with plenty of hyperlanes thanks to me increasing the hyperlane count in the settings, but no factions appear to be near us on our arm, so we can expand out in both directions. We're going to have a pretty decent chance to build up a sizable empire if we spam all of our influence and alloys, or as much as possible, into building out in long lines down the systems to cut off any enemy access to stuff behind us, which we can do by then closing our borders to their science ships. We do catch wind of another faction to our west, so we'll need to build forwards as quickly as possible and grab some nice choke points if we can, and keep those blocks of territory behind it ready for later so we can expand into them. The most important thing to have is systems with planets in them. We've got quite a few of those, more than I can really colonize at the same time, so we're good for economic expansion. The economic stuff is the main thing that you do in the game. It's also not something I'm going to talk about in this series, which is why it's probably going to be quite short. My main strategy is essentially to build gene clinics everywhere, try and get as many people as possible, and then just wing it using the market board to try and balance all of the other economic factors at the same time, building in a semi-random fashion. I actually really don't like the building system in this game, and in my previous campaigns I actually went out of my way to make sure I wouldn't have to do it by doing things like the One Planet challenge. But here we are, building things in the background. I assure you it's all fine, and when you see the negative numbers on the economy bar, well, I'll probably do something about that at some point. In terms of our war, nothing happened, which is what I wanted to happen, so I suppose that's good. And our war with the light blue faction just goes away because they get bored of thinking about attacking us. That's perfect. Now we can go and attack the other faction who currently do control one of our systems beyond the choke point. At this stage, we have some number, we've built up the number to do this, so we go for it. They actually tried to leave the system, so we took it back, and then we fought with their fleet, which is better. We don't have to fight with the space station at the same time. And in this battle, well, we've got the number, as I said, so we wait for something good to happen. I actually still haven't upgraded my weapons, I seem to remember. All of the techs I got were the upgrades for the other stuff, like engines and armor. So our attack still sucks, but we've got enough number to win the battle. I wanted to go forwards and try to press some of our claims after this, but they've got another fleet waiting just across the border. It's roughly the same strength as ours, so I didn't feel like attacking it and ultimately just sat here. It's another status quo situation. Although that said, we can't get a status quo peace because the enemy are aware that they're stronger than us, so they certainly have more stuff hidden away. We'll be in trouble if they attack us. Fortunately, they haven't thought of that yet. So we can sit here and still try to pump out more ships to match them. They're probably not spending so many alloys building outposts and star bases, so that's why they should be able to throw more ships at me if they really try. I actually fell back from the front line when it looked like they were going to attack and conceded that territory once again. I really didn't want to fight them away from my starbase where we can gain a bit of an advantage, but they didn't come to attack us. Ages later, however, my fleet had been gradually built up to the point when it does have more number than theirs, so I did decide to attack, and crucially, they didn't reinforce their frontline position after taking it. Therefore, we are able to grab this battle where the lights are flashing. I think I still don't have the weapon upgrades because I seem to remember your lasers turn blue after the very first weapon upgrade. The enemy clearly have it. So we still suck for weaponry, but it's working out. The lesson though is we shouldn't have actually been involved in either of these wars. If I'd been nice to these two factions and not fought these wars, I wouldn't have lost like 1,000 alloys worth of ships by now. We could have more stuff elsewhere if we hadn't been killing each other in these wars. The only upside is that the enemy were losing about the same amount of economic stuff as we were. Now we win the battle, but we certainly don't win the war, because immediately after the battle, I spot this large fleet on the other side of the hyperlane. They've still got loads more stuff, and again, if they had concentrated that stuff together, we would be in enormous trouble. It's just sheer AI luck that they haven't done that, and we're actually able to get out of the war right now with the status quo peace, simply because they had really high war exhaustion. And because we just took back the territory they occupied, a status quo peace would mean that essentially nothing happened in the end. The peace takes a while to go through, so they're actually attacking me during the peace process. I'm trying to not fight them to preserve my ships, but the peace does go through before they attack. In fact, their ships appear to be going back. They didn't even want to attack me, but there we go. So the war is over, both our wars are over, and the end of our epic campaign brings only harm and despair to both us and our enemies. Well, I suppose that's a crisis-y thing to do as well. It was all a waste of time, but it could have gone a lot worse, especially if the AI realised that. They've been somewhat kind to me, and we're on track to still keep them at bay with that choke point, which I'm only going to make stronger over time, while we keep using up our expansion options. We've got plenty of stuff to do. We don't really need to conquer our neighbours. We can just make our own new planets elsewhere. And all the while, our future enemies will be building up their planets, making them nice and juicy for when we take them. It's an investment, this peace process. That's how we'll sell it to our belligerent Beetles. They'll get more war and better war later if we don't war now. They are sending us these diplomatic insults. This suggests the AI is still interested in attacking us. We've got our frontline fleet and our base ready, and we'll keep it nice and upgraded. Since the war could start at any time with either of the factions, I could try to increase my relations with them, but I didn't, I seem to recall. I did increase my relations with the other faction up at the top left, who were also one of the nice, religious, peaceful factions who didn't look like they were going to attack us anyway, which of course will be their mistake when the time comes. We got pretty far down the outer arm of the spiral galaxy. Before I started going back with my expansion, I'd got so far and claimed so much territory behind my choke points. I thought we might as well start actually filling it in a little bit, especially because I do have contact negotiations going on with a faction that's somewhere on the outer arm to my south, so we probably can't go much further. Economy still in shambles a little bit as we sort things out. Doing loads of colonization at the same time, I think is the reason why the economy is difficult, because all of your new rubbish planets use more resources than they make for a while. And we're going to make up for that by just scrambling to sell things on the market board and try to get all of our money back. And this does work out in the end. It was perhaps just suboptimal, because selling things on the market board increases the price of everything and comes with markups, that sort of stuff. Now I finally realize what I'm supposed to do in order to kind of activate this Nemesis DLC when I spotted that there is an Ascension perk called Become the Crisis in that list there. So what we have to do is complete one more set of traditions, then I can click a thing that will officially turn me into a Crisis faction. Therefore, we haven't actually seen any of the Nemesis DLC in part 1 of the Nemesis campaign, but I suspect that in part 2, that's going to change. I'm going to stop this episode there. I'm going to try and keep the episodes a little bit short for this series, because we've already skipped through like 3 hours of gameplay, and it's going to be hard to keep up actually playing the game in time to make the episodes. Well, we'll see. Thanks for watching part 1. Effectively nothing happened, but we've got off to a really good start, putting us possibly in a great position to kill everybody else at some point, and see what kind of big deal the game makes about it with this Crisis DLC stuff enabled. I'll see you there.